You didn't leave the relationship broken. You left it confused. Something happened in there that changed you in ways you're still discovering. And the worst part isn't the damage. It's that you can't fully locate it. You know something was done to you. You don't have the language for it. And the reason the words keep coming out wrong is not because the damage wasn't real. It's because the damage was to the part of you that would have been able to see it. A narcissist doesn't leave bruises. There are no records, no single event you can point to. What they leave is something harder to name, a nervous system that is no longer entirely your own. The research on what happens inside the brain during narcissistic relationships doesn't describe emotional manipulation. It describes a neurological process. What gets targeted is not your feelings. What gets targeted is your capacity to evaluate reality. And by the time the damage is complete, the instrument you would have used to measure it has already been compromised. You cannot see it. That's not a coincidence. That's the mechanism. Every narcissistic relationship begins with an installation. Before the withdrawal, the contempt, the slow erasure, there is an intensity of attention that most people have never experienced. Psychologist Otto Kernberg, whose decades of research at Cornell shaped how psychiatry understands narcissistic personality structure, identified what happens underneath. The narcissist doesn't attach to a person. They attach to a reflection, a mirror that confirms what they need to believe about themselves. That asymmetry, the intensity of their focus on the reflection, the complete absence of curiosity about the actual person, is invisible to someone who has never before felt truly seen. But the person receiving that attention doesn't know any of this yet. What they feel is being seen, completely, immediately, as if for the first time. That feeling is neurological. The brain responds to intense early relationship attention with a dopamine surge, the same pathway activated by cocaine, by gambling, by every reward system the brain has ever been hijacked by. The connection doesn't just feel good, it becomes a reference point. This is what love is supposed to feel like. The nervous system files it as the standard.
And then the standard gets used against you. Psychologist B.F. Skinner discovered something in the 1950s while studying reward patterns. Unpredictable rewards, given sometimes, withheld arbitrarily, produced stronger and more compulsive behavior than consistent ones. The animals pressed the lever more desperately when they couldn't predict when the reward would come. This is called intermittent reinforcement, and it is the structural architecture of every narcissistic relationship. Picture this. You were in the middle of the cycle. Last week there was coldness, contempt, a silence that lasted 4 days. Now there is warmth again, a message, a gesture, an evening that feels like the beginning. Your nervous system doesn't register relief. It registers a dopamine spike significantly higher than it would have if the warmth had simply been consistent. The brain is not responding to love. It is responding to uncertainty resolved. The relief becomes indistinguishable from the love itself. And the next time the coldness comes, something in you will be working to get back to this feeling. Not because you chose it, but because the reward schedule was written into your neurology before you understood what was happening. Meta-analyses of relationship research indicate that the compulsive pull of intermittent reinforcement is neurologically indistinguishable from addiction. Not as metaphor, but as mechanism, the same circuitry, the same inability to leave something that is clearly causing harm. During the devaluation phase, the criticism, the contempt, the silent treatment, something else is happening in the brain. The amygdala registers social rejection as a survival threat. Neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA documented exactly this. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the region that processes physical pain, activates identically during social exclusion.
Your partner's contempt didn't just feel like a wound. To your nervous system, it registered as one. Not metaphorically, neurologically. And sustained threat produces cortisol. So why do people in these relationships often become more confused the longer they stay? Not less. Because cortisol flooding, repeated across weeks and months, suppresses the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational evaluation and detecting that something is wrong. The part of your brain that would have told you to leave was functionally impaired by the very conditions that made leaving necessary. You became hyper-vigilant instead, scanning for signals, the tone of voice, a shift in expression, the specific quality of a silence, because your threat system had learned that if you could read the room fast enough, you could get ahead of the next rupture. That scanning replaced thinking. It replaced certainty. Eventually, it replaced knowing what was real. Psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk spent 30 years studying what long-term psychological threat does to the body. His His finding was precise. The brain reorganizes itself around the threat, not just the memory of it, the ongoing physical reality of it. The body keeps the score long after the mind has tried to move on. Neuroscientist Martin Teicher at Harvard documented something more specific. Sustained psychological stress in key relational contexts produces measurable changes in hippocampal volume and cortical development, the structures governing self-evaluation, memory, and threat detection. Daniel Siegel at UCLA, whose work on interpersonal neurobiology maps how relational experience shapes brain architecture, has observed that the nervous system which develops inside chronic relational unpredictability doesn't just record the experience, it becomes organized around it. This is the damage you couldn't see.
Not a scar, not a single memory, a structural reorganization of the brain you were using to evaluate what was happening to you. Here is what actually happened. You entered the relationship with a brain capable of assessing reality. What followed was a sequential and largely invisible process, a dopamine installation that made the connection feel like the standard for love, an intermittent reward schedule that turned uncertainty into compulsion, a cortisol environment that suppressed the exact faculties you would have needed to see it, and a long enough timeline that the neurological changes became your new baseline. The conventional wisdom frames this as bad choices or poor judgment. That framing misses everything. You didn't fail to see clearly. The relationship was structured around preventing you from seeing clearly. The confusion wasn't a byproduct, it was the product. By the time you recognized that something was wrong, your ability to trust your own perception had already been one of the casualties. You have spent a long time trying to explain this to yourself, to people who weren't inside it. The words come out too small or too dramatic or too vague, not because the experience was any of those things, because the part of you that would have narrated it clearly was one of the first things to go. The confusion was not weakness. The inability to leave was not love. The loyalty to someone who was slowly dismantling you was not a character flaw. It was a brain responding with perfect logic to what had been done to it. What was done to you has a mechanism, a neurological signature, a measurable effect. You couldn't see the damage because the damage was to the lens.